I think that all relationships should be about intention. If you make a date for Friday at 7 p.m. to meet at this restaurant, I've made reservations. To me, I don't see the need for an additional confirmation. You should trust me that I am a person that commits, right? I wouldn't have asked you out if I didn't intend to go on a date with you. And if you need some additional confirmation, then I think that more says something about you than it does about that person. Everything should be with intention. Like you said, why are you going out with this person if you don't intend to try to date them afterwards, right? If you don't like them, if nothing about them seems good, but like your family likes, then you're not leading with intention.
Hello, welcome back to Dating Rehab with Anna Morgenstern. Today I have Z.E. Silver. He has been my Instagram friend for a while now. He was always commenting on a lot of my dating topics. So I finally had to tell him, okay, you need to just get on the podcast. You clearly care about this stuff. So thank you, Z.E., for coming on. Tell us a little bit about you, what you do, and then we'll get into the topic for today.
Thanks so much for having me on. Yes, I do have a lot of opinions about dating because I think that a lot of it comes down ultimately to self-awareness and a lot of just honesty with your own self and with each other. And I struggled a lot dating, and then I found my Basheret, and I try my best to help others find their Basheret. And so I am a Jewish professional. I've been doing content creation on TikTok and Instagram in the geopolitical realm and politics and Israel and Jewish history. Not a lot of dating stuff, but obviously the idea of Jewish marriage and Jewish babies and things like that is always top of mind and top of conversation, which I love engaging about. And I am also going to be a published author. I'm publishing a fantasy book in actually the spring. This is a great time to, I guess, announce that I originally was supposed to be the fall, but because of some exciting things on both the personal and the professional front in the fall, it's going to be in the spring. And so I'm really excited to talk about relationships and talk about, like I said, how people can find their Basheret.
I love that. Yeah, my husband, if I ever set up a Jew with a non-Jew, which I don't do anymore, but back, before October 7th, everyone was kind of more loose about that stuff. If I even think about doing that now, he would murder me. He would divorce me. He would not stand for it. So I've been much more strict about only setting up Jews with other Jews. And, I've gotten more into the world of just Jewish matchmaking. I'm trying to build this global Jewish network. So it's always nice to connect with other people who feel as passionately about keeping the Jewish spirit alive the way I do. And then today we're actually going to talk about long distance relationships. It's not a topic I've talked about on the podcast yet. And I know you're a perfect person to discuss that with because you and your wife were long distance for a while. So I'd love to hear your story, how you guys met. And I want to know, were you put off by the fact that it was going to be long distance, or are you like, it's okay, I'm in this? Tell us how you were feeling and all the different, steps it took to get to married.
Yeah. So I was living in Austin, Texas, and my wife was living in Santa Barbara. She was working for the Hillel at the University of California, Santa Barbara. I was working at the Hillel at UT. And so we actually met at the big Hillel Global Assembly. It's like a big conference for all of the staff. She had a friend and I had a friend who were friends with each other. And so as I was very, very single at the time, and I saw this cute girl. She was wearing a mint green sweater because I know that specifically because she hates it when I bring up that sweater. And probably the funniest thing was, so the way I introduced myself is, I told her my name and then she said hers, and I asked her where she's from, and she said she was from LA. And I said, well, where are you from in LA? And just like, I think it's a cardinal rule that every Los Angeles person has to give you like a dirty look to ask, like, do you know LA? And it's like, and so I said, yes, like my dad is from Woodland Hills area. My mom is from North Hills. My family's from there. And she said, oh, well, I'm from West Hills. And I said, Woodland Hills area. And I said, what high school did you go to? And she said, El Camino. I said, great. That's where my dad went. And so, we were talking a little bit, and we ended up hanging out a couple of times like throughout the conference and seeing each other in various sessions and having coffee, things like that. Nothing ever happened, honestly. But I had her number. And so the conference ended. We went our separate ways. And the following Monday, I think it was, or so, I texted her saying like, hey, how was the rest of your conference? And she said, who is this? And I must have forgotten to actually text her my name. And I said, it's Zach from Texas. And it was easy because, I literally wore burnt orange all the time. And like, I made sure everybody knew that I was like from the UT Hillel. And she was like, oh, okay, cool. And we were talking back and forth, and it was crazy because she was actually on her way to Israel to lead a birthright trip. And I kind of like to point out that, had I texted her like 10 minutes early, she probably would have been bustling with her bag and trying to get the kids organized. Or if I texted her certainly 10 minutes too late, plane would have been taken off. She would have put in airplane mode. That would have been that. And so it was kind of in this perfect moment. And so when she went to Israel, we actually ended up messaging over Facebook. This was back in 2016, 2017, when that was still a thing. And so we were messaging back and forth. And then she came home and I went to Israel and I was messaging her back and forth. We actually ended up FaceTiming while I was in Israel. And then to make it already long story short, we basically just kept texting back and forth. We started FaceTiming a little bit more on a regular basis. And finally I said, like, would you be interested in coming out to Austin? And so she had a friend who lived out there. And so she kind of felt comfortable with the idea of flying out to see me, knowing that if there was anything wrong, again, she doesn't know me at this point, that she can always kind of like have this kind of like pull the record opportunity. And so she bought that ticket probably just after New Year's or so, but for the end of February. And so there was a lot of time between that while we were still talking and FaceTiming and things like that. And roughly around the beginning of February, I FaceTimed her again and I was like, kind of like setting expectations. I was like just in the beginning for all of therapy for the first time in my life. And so my therapist had suggested that like I set expectations accordingly because these types of things I have built up in my head before. And so when we had set the expectations accordingly, like what is the point of you coming out here? It is not to like see how we do, right? Or like, just to hang out, but like it's really to see if this is something real. And so we were both on that expectation. And so it also gave her a good month to actually do it, to say no. And so when she came out, we spent the full weekend together. It was not a perfect weekend. She told me many times prior that she does not eat fish. And so I tried to do this really cool thing where a friend of mine owned a restaurant. And so I wanted to look cool in front of her. So I booked us a table there. It was called Coast and it only served seafood. And I totally forgot. But she was really cool about it. And they made like special veggie tacos that were really good. And then we went out and we did a couple things. She actually met some friends of mine who were there. And so she spent the weekend. But basically, at the end of that weekend, I said, look, like, I don't want to play games. You live 2,000 miles away, however far that is. Like, I want us to be exclusive. And if not, then like, that's cool. But that's the way I feel. And she said, yes. We got very lucky because we had another about 3 weeks later. We were both going to be in San Diego at the same time. So for different conferences. And so when we were there, like she was close by to the hotel. And so she ended up coming over to the hotel. And so then after that, it was like, okay, this is real. Like we're boyfriend, girlfriend, things like that. We basically just kind of like flew out to each other in various ways. So we flew out to Denver to meet my parents. Sometime in the summer, I flew out to LA to spend time with her parents. So I'd sometimes go to Santa Barbara. She'd sometimes come out to me, or we'd like go somewhere for a trip or something like that. And we basically did that for a year and a half. And then after that, we were kind of both coming up on the same kind of end zone or like the end time of our time at Hillel. She was looking to either move on from her job or go to grad school. I was starting to build a startup and I was kind of done with my time. And so when she decided that she was going to go to grad school in Los Angeles, I said, okay, well, I'm going to go through my startup. And so we moved in with each other in LA because I mean, it would be crazy to try to do that living as singles, even though we're together. And so we just jumped right in. And so we did that and we got engaged February of 2020. And
Oh.
then yeah, it was wild. We got back we were away for the engagement for when I proposed, and then when we got back, we're like, oh, like we should do an engagement party. And we were like, yeah, but the month of March is just so busy for us. Let's do it like in April. And so then COVID happened, and that never happened.
Mm.
And then we ended up moving to Arizona in June of 2020, and we got married in October of 2021.
So many things to unpack there. And a lot of the things that you talked about are things I want to discuss of like some basic ground rules of if you're going to try to do a long distance relationship, how much you need to communicate, having plans to see each other again, all of those things. So since you guys actually met in person first and then, went back to your respective cities, that's a little bit different than if you're just like meeting on an app and have never met before. So because you
For
meet
sure.
someone, if you meet someone in person, there's already that familiarity and you've already kind of built somewhat of a connection. Did you guys discuss the like being comfortable doing long distance, or is it just assumed that or did it not even come up because you weren't even thinking that when you first met her?
Yeah, I mean, I would say that the way that I personally approached it, because again, I was like, my history with relationships is a tenuous one. And so, or whatever you want to call it. And so the way that I was trying to approach it differently, where normally I would jump 2 feet in, from the very beginning, I was really trying to approach this from a more, step by step process. And so the way I looked at it was like, look, she's a cool girl. I like talking to her. And if I like talking today, I'll talk to her tomorrow. And if she is not cool to talk to tomorrow, then I'm not going to talk to her again. Because again, being long distance means that there's really not a lot of pressure on the front end, as opposed to if you're in the same city, you run in the same circles, regardless of, especially in the Jewish community or how big it is. If you meet in person, and something goes bad, there's some additional stigmas that surround it, right? People talk, which can also create a lot of pressure of like, do I actually want to date this person? Because what will people think of me dating this person? Because everybody has these preconceived notions. None of my friends knew who this person was, and none of her friends knew who I was. And so from that perspective, even some of the kind of like early missteps, both when we had met and also kind of like and within the first 6 to 8 months, there was a lot of wiggle room. There was a lot of room for improvement, a lot of room for forgiveness, and also just like we got to be in the relationship together. And it was really just about us rather than, well, what are people going to think? What are, so on, what's going to happen if it doesn't go well? The other thing, and then for me, I've always, one of my, I guess, the downfalls of my relationship history is that for me, I've always just been a very upfront and honest person where it's like, I don't understand the game. I've never been good at the game. The whole like texting back and forth and you wait 3 days or you don't double text and whatever it is. Like to me, it's like you make a plan. Like oh, you have to confirm the day of. Like I don't understand that. Like we made a plan. It's on the calendar. I've been it's 7 p.m. on a Friday. We said that we were going to meet there. Let's meet there. I don't understand that notion that like you are just waiting for something else. You've made a commitment to a person. They're a human being. And so therefore the idea of like needing an additional confirmation to me says more about who you are as a human rather than, anything else. And if you don't want to go out with that person, just say so, right? It's about being honest. You're not helping the situation by trying to be nice and be like, oh, I'll say yes. And then, but I'll wait for the confirmation or I'll wait to see if there's a better something. And so the fact that it was long distance meant that this relationship was much more based on that initial communication style, right? That like if she was not going to communicate back to me, if she was not going to reply to me like in a timely manner, like then okay, like then I don't need this, right? And then also at the same time as well, I think it's really easy for relationships to so easily be based around what you do in person, right? So you go out together, you go to parties together, you do fun stuff together, you go to the parks, whatever it is, right?
Yeah.
But what you talk about during that time can be both shallow and deep, depending on who the people are. On the other hand, you get past the shallow stuff pretty quickly when it comes to long distance, right? You can only talk about your day so much over text. And
Mhm.
so at that point, like you get into the stuff around families and values and things like that. Cause again, it's like if if we don't align here, like there's no point. We don't live next to each other. It's not like we can just like casually hook up. There's no physical like on that front end of piece to it. You either like this person or you don't. You like talking to this person or you don't. And if you don't, like there's really no other benefit to trying to keep engaged with them the way that it might encourage you to be engaged if you live around the block from somebody, right? And for me, I've always just been a person that likes kind of just jumping in, whatever it was. And so the long distance actually worked in my favor. And that's why I encourage a lot of people to frankly like be okay with long distance because you're going to get into that stuff pretty quickly and you'll quickly realize whether this person is someone that you can connect with on a deeper level.
Mhm. Yeah, you're right. Because so much of early dating, you only see someone for an hour, 2 hours. You don't really have a lot of their time. It could be a couple months before you're spending a weekend together or spending a significant amount of time in one sitting. It's hard to get deeper in those moments. I think about my relationship. My husband and I, we had 2 dates, and then I was actually gone for at least a week, maybe 10 days in San Diego seeing my family. And so we kind of almost did a little bit of that long distance where we were on the phone for at least an hour, sometimes 2, 3 every day because I would go on my beach walks and I would call him. And we kind of had that long distance relationship where we were getting to know each other over the phone and having really like deep conversations. And I was talking about the dynamics of being with my family. As we all know, like it's never easy for anyone. He was just so supportive. And so we almost had that long distance kind of in the beginning. And I do think that was one of the reasons I felt so close to him when I got back because we already kind of talked about all the things that we could talk about. That would have taken us months to do that if we were just dating in the city. But let's shift gears to if you meet someone on a dating app and they're in a different city. New York has the most amount of Jews outside of Israel. So a lot of people in other cities, they have a lot of people from Europe, from Toronto, Mexico, South America, South Africa that want to date New York because there's a more concentration of single Jewish people here. But it's like, how do you really kind of do that successfully? So, question for you. You match on an app and, there's a lot of back and forth. You're in different cities. Do you like immediately do a FaceTime just to see if there's like a vibe there? Or do you kind of let it like be text for a while? What do you think's better?
As a quick funny story about that, actually, because on my very first birthright trip that I led, I landed at JFK, and Austin has a extremely small Jewish community. And like I was on J Swipe, and I would like swipe twice, and they were like, "You run out of people," and I'm like, "Great." And so I landed at JFK, and I pulled out J Swipe. I was like 23 years old, and I was like, "Oh my god, look at all of these such attractive women!" And then I like matched even before I got to the gate, and I'm like, should I move here? And then I got to my hotel and I went to a bar and ordered like a Sam Adams like Boston Lager. It was $11, and I was like, well, I'm not moving here. But anyways, no, I think that's an interesting question. To me, I think like one of the things you hit the nail on was that when we had met in person, there was like kind of this natural grounding in that both working for Hillel at the time, we had both known, like we knew friends who knew each other, right, to kind of like vouch for us. And so I'm not entirely certain if the apps are the best way to be introduced via long distance, right? And instead, it's what I've encouraged some of my own friends who I've spoken to who are single in New York City or Los Angeles is I tell them to be open to long distance. And I actually think that there's an opportunity here to connect long distance people, right? And
Yeah.
so how do you have if you are in New York City and you have friends in Miami, instead of like going and swiping in when you go to Miami, ask your friends to introduce you to people who would be okay with meeting somebody who lives in New York full time. And I think that therefore that grounding, and then you can meet in person again, kind of through this more casual situation where there's not so much weight to this date, right? Where I think sometimes the formality of it, right? These questions of like, well, how many times, how long do you text for before you FaceTime? Do you FaceTime first? Like, how many days do you like? I think at the end of the day, like the way that I approached it was, how did I feel at the end of the day talking to my now wife, right? When we were just starting dating, like, do I enjoy talking to you? Okay, great. Then like I'm gonna talk to you and I'm going to make sure that I reply to you. If I'm really busy, I'm gonna reply to you. Or like when I was on Birthright, I would tell her, like, hey, got a long day. I'll text you when I get home, or like let's try to FaceTime if it's too late. And if it was too late, I would make sure like, hey, like I'm exhausted. Like, can we, FaceTime 2 days from now or something like that. Like we would be, again, it's all about the communication, but it was grounded in the sense that we had vouchers for us. And so I don't know, or what I would suggest is instead of, again, creating hard, fast rules of like, don't use the apps, it's a matter of how do you create natural connections that allow for an initial foundation of trust that says, this is a person that I want to engage with, and then I'm going to measure how I feel after I'm done speaking with that person. And that should be a binary. It actually shouldn't be like a spectrum. That shouldn't be an over analyzing opportunity. That should be like, I felt good. That was fun. And if it was fun talking to that person, keep going. If you try to analyze, like, well, they were like this and they did that, and like, oh, I didn't like their shoes, or like, oh, like she just like, I don't like her voice, like, then that's how you remain single forever. But at the end of the day, if you just say, like, I had fun talking to that person, then you should talk to them again, because fun people are fun to talk to. And if they weren't fun to talk to, then it doesn't matter who they are or how much money they have or what they do for a living or, whether or not their parents have a place in the Poconos. Like at the end of the day, like if they weren't fun talking to, like why would you keep talking to them?
So true. I think with dating in New York, especially, but when you meet someone for an hour or 2 hours, you're really kind of evaluating what's wrong with them and if it fits for you and if it doesn't. You're kind of going into it already. I joke, but it's kind of true. You go into a date, you're at 100. And they say, oh, I have a cat. Okay, minus 20 points. Okay, I still live with my parents, minus 80, whatever it is. You're deducting points based on your evaluation of them. And I think that's kind of the worst thing that people do in dating because no one's perfect. But with long distance, it's more about that connection, less about, like you said, like if they're wearing the wrong thing or if their apartment is in this neighborhood versus that neighborhood. It's less superficial. It's much more connection based. Like it's more of a connection from the soul versus the body. And we've talked about this too of how dating has just kind of I don't know. It's we've gone off the tracks when it
Well, I
comes
guess I don't
to
understand this
people.
because when people are minusing points and stuff like that, like they're clearly looking for reasons to
Yeah, just
not be there as opposed to looking for like the way that I always approach dating, and again, maybe that's why I wasn't all that successful over the course of time until my now wife, like, which was like I was always actually looking for reasons to stay. And like that hindered me in a lot of ways, but where I would like look past things, and that was based upon my own insecurities and so on and so forth. But to me, it's like one of those things where if someone had a cat, it's like not minus 20. It's like, well, I'm not a cat person. I don't like cats. Like, if you love cats and I don't love cats, like, we're probably not going to work because it's just like that's kind of a thing for me, right? On the other hand, like, if someone's like living in a certain place, or like if someone said I live with my parents, like, why? Because there's a lot of reasons why someone could live with their parents. They could be taking care of one of their parents. They could be taking care of one of their siblings. They could have just lost their job. Like, I think what feels like to me when I listen to people talk about their dating situation is that it feels like people are they're just not very curious.
right,
They
exactly.
they're like they're in this hour, like you said, this hour window in which they are essentially interviewing candidates for a job. And in the same way that someone says, oh, well, like you don't hit disqualification, so like it's minus this or whatever it is, as opposed to saying like, I wanted to know who you are as a person. And so I would hope that the lesson to take away from this conversation, even if you are completely against long distance, is that when you go out into the world and you go out on a date, that hour should be for the purpose of being curious. You should be able to walk away saying, hey, you know what? I know a lot about this person and they may not be for me, but you know what? But the reason I know that is because I know a lot about them and it's just not for me right now.
Yeah, I've been encouraging people lately that don't say yes to a date with someone unless you're willing to say yes to 5 dates with them, because I feel like
That's
a
interesting.
yeah, I feel like a lot of people, well, especially on the female side, they'll go on a date because they feel like they should, but they already know in their mind, the guy's not it's not gonna happen with them. They're just saying yes to either be polite or to be nice, or that's when they think they should go out because their parents would like them, but they already know going into the first date, they're probably not gonna give that guy a second date.
Why? Why don't they why have they already made that that's my question, like, why have they already made that preconceived
Yeah,
notion that they're not gonna go out with
they've
them
already
afterwards?
decided, yeah, they've already maybe, let's say maybe they're not that attracted to them, but they really like their background and, they're from the same town on Long Island, or, it could be a lot of different things. Or it could be that they typically only date someone who is a different ethnicity from them, but they're trying to date someone with a similar background because that's something their family will, like people try to sometimes please others when it comes to dating rather than being true to like really what they're looking for. Or yeah, or they just feel like I usually date like these really hot, sexy bad boys. I'll go out with this nice guy, but I know I'm not going to be into him. Right.
So
So,
interesting.
I mean, even when I was dating, I remember there were definitely times I was saying yes to dates because I felt like, "Oh, this is a guy I should be out with. This is a guy I should end up with," even though I wasn't really feeling it. But as women, our attraction can grow as we get to know someone. Like physical attraction for us definitely grows with
Yeah.
experience and how they treat us, how we feel with them. So we're kind of more open in that regard. But I'm trying to really instill this idea like if you say yes to one date, you're saying yes to five because you don't really know someone after one or two or three dates, even. You have to do different things together, like, you do an activity, even if it's like, "Okay, we're gonna go to Whole Foods together, and then we're gonna cook dinner." Like, doing something that's kind of already, like, as a couple, I think is really nice to do, and I think it's why long distance dating, like, when you're living together, essentially, you kinda skip all the stuff, like, you already see what it's like to be in a couple very early on, so I
Yeah.
think we should mimic that in some ways in dating in the same city too. It shouldn't just be drinks and dinner for the first 10 dates. That's really sustainable. You're not really finding out what makes them frustrated, how they handle chaotic situations, or if they're actually say if they say like, "Oh, I love to cook," but you get them in the kitchen, they don't know what they're doing. You gotta get to test them a little bit and make
Yeah.
sure they what they say they are. And it's rather than always being your best foot forward, when you are in a situation that's stressful, like that was really telling of how someone handles that. Or even like playing a game together and they get really competitive and they're a sore loser, that's kinda something that you wanna keep an eye out for too, but yeah, I think with early dating, commit to seeing them at least 5 times, and if you already know, like, "I don't wanna see this person 5 times," then don't say yes to the first date, because what do you think's gonna happen if you marry them? You're gonna see them a lot more than that. Okay, and then when you're in the long distance relationship, I think it's really important that you always know when you're gonna see each other again. Like, you can't just kinda be, like, talking, and you have no idea who's going to fly to who, where, or when, it's that would feel really unsafe for me. I would wanna know, "Okay, I just got back from visiting you, and we already decided that next you're gonna come to me, or we're gonna meet somewhere." Or even if it's like we're talking like, maybe we don't have an exact plan, but at least we're talking about what we might do next. Just to leave it open-ended would feel really crazy to me. I don't think I'd be comfortable with that. Did you guys always have a plan of when you would see each other again?
We like talked about San Diego right after she came out, and then after that, I said that I would come out to her, and so we stopped in LA to so I could meet her parents, and then we went up to Santa Barbara, and then after that, she came back out to Austin, and then we actually had a pretty long hiatus because she came out the beginning of May, and I had already planned for like my big 20s trip, which was a 3 week backpacking trip around Japan. And so which was going to be in June after my birthright trip. And so I was going to be gone. So we weren't going to see each other for like 2 months. And so there was this natural fit because she had a friend who was getting married in San Diego. And so she was given a plus one. And so she was able to give it to me. And so we met in San Diego. Actually, we met in LA. We drove to San Diego. Then we flew from San Diego to Denver and met my parents. And so we spent like a full like 7, 8 days together, like with multiple travel opportunities. And then after that, it was a mix of going to like whether it was going to Austin or going to I remember going to LA to for Thanksgiving to spend time with her whole family, and then like we would maybe do a trip, and so we like would meet. And then we would went up to San Luis Obispo for a trip. So like there was kind of like a combination of things, but I mean, we really did not go more than somewhere between 4 to 6 weeks without seeing each other. And there was always like very clear delineations that said like, okay, like Thanksgiving is coming up. Like, are you coming? And like
Mm,
the answer, like, we're spending time, we're spending that. This is what you're supposed to do. You're supposed to spend Thanksgiving together. Right. So the question is like, where are you spending it? And the answer was at the time was her parents to meet her family and stuff. And so I think our big thing was that we didn't delay the process just
yeah.
because we were long distance, right? It wasn't about the number of dates that we did or the amount of time that we specifically spent together, but it was just about what is the natural progression of what does it mean to actually like what is the next step? The next step is to meet your parents, right? After you've been dating for 4 months, right? You have to decide like, are you going to meet someone's parents or not meet someone's parents? And so I think that sometimes the way that dating feels like it today, according to again what people tell me, is that these dates that occur are kind of like moments, right? Where it's like you have a date on this Saturday and then you go out again 2 weeks later, right?
Right.
And then you go out again 3 weeks later, or like a week later, and then you go out maybe 2 days later, right? Because you've been getting better. And for them, the way that they think about that, the maybe I don't know if one or both think about it this way, but it's like how much time have you spent together? Well, we spent 4 hours together, but they've spent that 4 hours over the course of like 5 weeks. And so, but for us, that same 5 weeks was 5 weeks of dating because we were texting every day. We were sending Snapchats because Snapchat was still a thing back then for us. We were dating, right? Every day. And so when you are long distance, just not talking, not texting, just even just like, hey, like, how was your day, or checking in or sending a funny, Snapchat, like it just wasn't in the cards because at that point, like you're not dating. Right. And so the fact that at that point, even though we had only maybe spent a limited amount of time together or only were, had these individual moments, we were dating for 4 months. And if we were dating for 4 months, then what you do after dating for 4 months is you go and meet someone's parents.
Well, I mean, you're definitely way
Maybe.
more on the intentional scale than maybe some other people that have entered relationships. I mean, I
But I think
definitely
that's what long distance does. I think that long distance actually require to me, I think that all relationships should be should be about intention, right? And like if you again, like I said, at the very beginning of the conversation, like if you make a date, right, for Friday at 7 p.m. to meet at this restaurant, I've made reservations or whatever it is. To me, I don't see the need for an additional confirmation. You should trust me that I am a person that commits, right? Like I wouldn't have asked you out if I didn't intend to go on a date with you. And if you need some additional confirmation, then I think that more says something about you than it does about that person. And so everything should be with intention. Like you said, like if you're, why are you going out with this person if you don't intend to try to date them afterwards, right? If you don't like them, if nothing about them seems good, but like your family likes, like, then you're not leading with intention. I think this goes to a piece of advice that I told a friend of mine who really struggled. He's not Jewish, but he really struggled with dating and girls. And I saw him however many years ago, and he's always really struggled. And he says that he goes on these apps and he does this thing where he'll go out with someone, with a girl that's not whatever, but he's like, well, they keep telling me to lower my standards, to lower my standards. And I said, no, no, no. You don't lower your standards. You have to raise your standards, right? Because at the end of the day, right, if you know that you're not going to go out with this person, why would you waste an hour of your time and waste an hour of their time? And so
Uh,
for me, it's all about intention. And I think that long distance forces that because again, like you just said, if you didn't talk, if things were open ended, then that's not an intention, and you don't even have that proximity or that physical proximity to keep yourselves tied. And so to me, though, I think that long distance relationships and physical and close proximity relationships should be treated the exact same. I think that people just need to be forced to do it when they're in long distance. But my lesson or my recommendation would be is that regardless of if you're in the same building as somebody, if you're down the hall from somebody, or you're across the world from someone, if you're not approaching each relationship with intention, then what are we doing here?
mhm. I know I've definitely dated a few people long distance in my dating history that were not intentional, and I was so excited about it. So some we met in person first, and then we met on trips later. And then they would kind of diminish it, being like, "Oh, we only saw each other a couple of times." I'm like, "Well, what do you mean? I traveled to see you. There was like 2, 3 days there." Like, it's funny. Some people don't see it as a more of a serious type of dating situation because it is a bigger commitment when you're flying to meet someone. And it is more of your time. There was one in particular when he said, like, "I've only seen you, like, a couple times in my life," when we broke up, and I was like, "What are you talking about? I flew 3 times to see you. I've stayed with you." Like, for I don't know, that was really hurtful for him to diminish it so much.
For
And
sure.
there was another time where I met someone on Raya, and we were chatting a bunch, we were FaceTiming, and it really felt like we were building something over the phone. I was so excited to meet him. And finally, he asked me if I would come out to Nashville where he lived. And this is still the only time I've ever been in Nashville. I was only in Nashville for 36 hours, if that tells you anything. Yeah, it did not go well in person. It was just like awkward. It was so weird. I wasn't expecting that. Like, it wasn't the same in person as it was over the phone. So sometimes I think it's almost bad if you build too much over the phone first before you even meet. That's why I think if you meet someone from like a dating app and that's like the way as long as we met, like you almost want to meet in person or do something that's real first before you build up this whole relationship over the phone because you might feel disappointed. Like, it might not be the same in person. And because your expectations are going to be so, so high. And I have a lot of friends and clients who will be chatting with people. I mean, I had a client last week. He was telling me about this woman he's been chatting with and in a different country, and she wanted to meet this summer in Europe, and she wanted him to pay for everything. And I was like, absolutely not. This is a scam. I'm like, I've heard this a lot. I was like, is she really hot and like Eastern European? And he was like, yeah.
Oh, dude, you're about to get your kidney stolen.
Yeah. I was like, we're not going on this. And he's
You,
like,
you,
yeah.
I think that's interesting. You kind of bring up something that I just thought about, which is one, I 100% agree. And like I said before, I think that there's something really important about starting whatever relationship by meeting in person, right?
Hmm.
Because there's nothing that will ever replace the the vibes, the vibes and the energy that you receive back and forth from someone. I'm really bad at texting. If you were to ask any of the girls that I reached out to, like you would probably look at them like an ask, or if you were to ask them like what am I like as a texter, they'd be like, he's really intense, right? Because again, I'm just like I'm gonna text a lot, like I'm gonna be like, hey, like I texted you, you didn't text back. Like, what's going on here? Like, there is some, like, we have engaged, we've started this process, right? And what's funny is that my wife sees, like, I'm still the same intense person, but the way that my wife sees it is as passion, right? And so, and she saw that intensity as a form of something that she thought was a strength rather than a weakness. And the only way though that she kind of like understood that was because we had met in person, and she was able to see like the intensity can be fun, right? When I was like, cook 'em, baby. And like I wore like burnt orange all the time. Like I'm Zach from Texas, like whatever it is, like the way that she was able to kind of see me first and foremost was she was able to see the intensity, but in a fun and kind of funny way, but then also like there was the funny parts, there was the jokes, like there was the inquisitiveness, like there was the deepness. Like we spent like an hour and a half together having coffee. And so like the intensity that I have is also about something that she's intense about. And so to me, I think the idea of starting a relationship long distance over apps is really hard. And that I would recommend obviously people to do long distance and to figure out ways to get connected to people through a vouching system, through a matchmaker, and just be open to it and knowing that like when you spend time with somebody casually, like you should do it. But again, like it's a matter of the way that you sometimes have been describing things. I'm thinking to myself, like people are like treating this like a game, right? They're
Mhm.
just they're just trying to, it's almost like a gamble, right? And they're putting a coin into a slot and pulling the lever, hoping that it lands on jackpot. As opposed to me, I think it's like, this is your forever person, right? Like, aren't you trying to find your forever person? And if you're trying to find your forever person, isn't it always going to be like worth it to do what's necessary to go beyond, to wait a little bit longer, to, deal with some of the, the talking and the whispers behind the back or whatever it is, in order to find the person that you're going to spend the rest of your life with, that you're going to raise children with, that you will see, your own parents pass with, right? Like that there's like, this is the person who is supposed to take care of you if you have the worst sickness in the world. That's one person in the whole billions of world. And if in the Jewish world, even in 1 in 15 million, right? Why would you not be intentional with that? Why would you not do the work necessary in order to go and find that person?
Yeah, I think people aren't necessarily dating with that lens of, I need to look for the person who's gonna be my best friend, who I can go through tough times with, who's gonna be amazing mother or father for the future kids, who's gonna treat my family with respect like they would theirs. Like people don't necessarily look at those things when they're dating. They're like, okay, how tall is he?
That's
How healthy
crazy,
is
especially
he?
as a 5'8" person. Like, what are we doing here?
Yeah, I think people have kind of lost the
They lost
real.
the plot.
They lost the plot. Yeah, they don't know how to find a good partner. They don't know what to look for in a partner. I think a lot of it is the dating apps and social media and making humans a commodity with all these different tools that we have. And so I really think people need to go back to basics of what are you like, who's going to be with you for the next, 50, 60 years? Who do you want that person to be by your side? Because eventually we're all not going to be as hot as we are today, unfortunately. Unless you do a lot of plastic surgery, I don't know. But all of us are going to change. Our shapes are going to change. But who we are as people, what we connected to in that beginning, the laughter that we share, that best friend energy. I just posted something about that today about how to find that best friend in a partner because that's really what you want. That's going to keep you married for decades. You don't want to just marry someone who's hot and then divorce them 5 years later. And I see that all the time. People are divorced, like they really weren't dating with the mindset of who do I want to be with in my 60s and 70s. And yeah, but honestly, this has been very insightful. Thank you so much for being so open about your life and giving us so many good tips about long distance dating. I can't tell you how many people have reached out to me the last 2 weeks all about long distance. I think it's been really prevalent in the Jewish community these days, especially as we want to find each other all over the world if need be. Tell us again where people can find you and like the name of your book and when it's coming out and your Instagram.
Yeah, if I can offer just one closing
Yeah.
statement about it as well, because there's a difference between a girl that I could have done long distance with that didn't work out immediately, and one that obviously did work out. When you do long distance, one of the most important things is to decide where people are going to live, where you're going to live first. She lived in Santa Barbara at the time. I lived in Austin. Neither of us were going to be in those places for forever. There
Hmm.
was a choice between Los Angeles and Denver, basically, but we also discussed neutral grounds, right? Where it was like, San Diego or Seattle, but like we both decided that like we were not going to live east of the Mississippi. Neither of us were East Coast people. We weren't, none of us were going to live in the Midwest, despite her extended family being in Cleveland, especially for those in New York. And I know that in places like New York and places like Miami, more in large Jewish communities, the family ties can be really anchoring. And so it can be really, really hard when you have in Judaism and the Jewish families where every family is being with family at all times is really important all the time. And what I will tell people is that if you are going to do long distance, which I still always highly encourage you to do, which is to have a conversation early on that says, where are we going to live? Are we cool with this? And if that's not the case, as much as you might love that person, I think you should still give it a go because maybe because things can always change depending on circumstances and things like that. But ultimately, again, it's all about honesty. And so if you make sure to have that conversation and go with it and go with your gut about whether or not this is going to work, because I knew for a fact that it wasn't going to work with the first person, but I was, again, just this is pre therapy versus the second person. And so therefore, that's why it certainly worked it in that way. If you want to ask me for advice, I'm not an expert by any means, but you can always find me on Instagram, on TikTok, it's Ziggy Silver. And my book's name is The Three Sons of Asha. It's a fantasy book with a lot of Judaism in it, with a lot of stuff around the conflict. So look out for that in the spring.
Thank you again for coming on. Well, we might have to do another round at some point in the future.
I'm always here.